Hi everyone, welcome to the November 20th edition of the TimeformUS Forecast. I'm David Aragon, and I'll be joined very shortly by my co-host Craig Milkowski. This week on the podcast, we're going to do some handicapping of weekend racing from around North America, the United States, and also up north in Canada. We'll start things out in the Red Smith at Aqueduct, a Grade 3 event going a mile and 3/8 on the turf. I've got some of the top turf marathoners in the U.S. competing in that race. Then we're going to go down south to Churchill Downs, where they're running the Chaluki on Saturday. That's a mile race for the fillies and mares. And we'll finishing things up at Woodbine in Canada. They got a nice card on Saturday. 3 stakes races topped by the Best Arabian and the Kennedy Road, that ladder race featuring that likable older gelding Pink Lloyd, who I think has won something like 26 of 31 starts. He's just a really cool horse to root for, but he's always a short price, so we'll see if he's potentially beatable in that race when we get to that at the end of the podcast. Craig, though, we're starting things out in New York in the Red Smith, and featured in this race is a horse that I know both you and I have some strong opinions about, Sadler's Joy. He's likely to be the favorite, but I know he's one that you always like to try to take a shot against.
Yeah, I figure, as I mentioned earlier when we were talking offline, I always picture you just giddy with excitement when I see this horse in the entries and probably having trouble sleeping that night. But I like the horse. He's a cool horse. The problem with him is he just doesn't win very often. I think he's 1 for his last 18. He got DQ'd once this year, would have been 2 for 18. But he's a horse for me that's just a little bit tough to trust at a short price. His one win, however, did come in this race last year. So, he does seem to like the 3-turn races. He does appreciate the dropping class. Most of his wins have come against lower level competition, especially of late. Not that he's had many, but it does seem like he appreciates that dropping class. And I do like the switch to Joel Rosario, a jockey who surprisingly has never ridden the horse before, because he seems like he's almost tailor-made for him with as strong a finisher as he is and as Sadler's Joy is. And Sadler's Joy is a horse that can act a little goofy in the lane and maybe need that encouragement, and you have to time his ride perfectly. So Joel seems the guy that would fit him best. But that said, he's going to be a short price, and I'm just never interested in taking a short price on Sadler's Joy. It's just a tough one to like that way. It won't shock me if he wins, but I'm going to look elsewhere. A couple others that are probably most likely to be his main competition, I would say Red Knight, who's second choice on the morning line. He won that Sycamore last time out, and you can almost bank on a 120 TimeformUS speed figure plus or minus a few points. He's going to run his race because he almost always does, but that doesn't give him any kind of special edge over several in here. So at a short price, I'm going to probably pass on him as well. Zayad's one who's second start in the country for Graham Motion. He could certainly win as well. I think he has a 119 that he ran in that debut in the Sycamore. But Graham Motion's a guy that does really well with first-time Euro shippers. So while I think he'll run well, I would want to bank that he's going to run better second time out than he did first time, and I didn't see anything special from him. So that said, I'm going to take a shot at a price for my top pick, and that's going to be Postulation. He's a horse that's shown pretty far back in the pace projector, but this is a case where I actually don't agree with the pace projector. I think he'll be much closer up. If you look through his PPs at some weird circumstances where he's been in races where I wasn't able to make pace figures the times he's been up close to the lead. So it's a little bit deceptive in my opinion. And I really liked his race in the Sycamore. Looking through that chart, even though we don't have pace figures, he's a horse you can see that was clearly the best of the speed horses. It looks like the race just completely fell apart except for him, who held on to be second. And it's not like he was battling other long shots for the lead. There were horses that were bet pretty hard in there. One's in this race whose name's escaping me at the second. But I just think he ran a lot better than it probably looks even on speed figures and on paper. So at a big price, he's the one I'll try to beat the likely favorites.
Well, I guess I'll start by giving my defense of Sadler's Joy. Look, he's going to be a short price in this race, and I know I'm endorsing a favorite, but I think he's actually been in pretty good form this year. And sure, he's just got that one official victory in the Red Smith in the past year, but I mean, he did cross the wire first in the Bowling Green, and I would say he was best that day. He did bump a horse in the lane and got disqualified, and I'm not saying the disqualification was unjustified, but I mean, he did run a winning race on that occasion. And I even think he ran pretty well in the Turf Classic last time at Belmont. That was a race that didn't feature much pace at all. Channelmaker was just able to walk along in the lead and keep going every step of the way. And Sadler's Joy, to his credit, at least he tried to win the race. He made an early move, commenced at about the 3/8 pole to try to get into position to win that race. Just couldn't quite sustain that momentum the final eighth of a mile, and he was passed from behind, but I think that was due to the fact that they started his move so early. And I think what you highlighted, the rider switch to Joel Rosario, I think it's going to be important for this horse because, I mean, nothing against Javier Castellano, who is, a top-notch rider, but I think Javier got almost too familiar with this horse. And I know the connections believe he needs to be ridden a certain way, and in many of his races, Castellano would start to wind him up very early on the far turn, and he would end up making these premature moves, as you saw in the Turf Classic, losing a ton of ground. That's not really Rosario's style, especially riding a course like we see at Aqueduct, where it's so important to save ground on the turns. Joel Rosario understands that. I mean, if you want to watch an amazing ride that he gave going this exact distance, go look at the Long Island handicap from last year when he rode that filly for Grab Motion CKS Buena, going from last to first, I think in the final quarter mile, coming up the rail the entire way. I'm not saying that Sadler's Joy necessarily needs that kind of perfect trip to win this race, but I think Joel's just going to be a perfect fit for him. And just based on his overall form, in my opinion, he's just better than these horses. I know that you're not supposed to take deep closers like this at short prices. I just think he's a horse that I couldn't really make a strong stand against in this race. And the other logical runner, Red Knight, who you mentioned, I thought he got a great ride to win the Sycamore last time. As you said, he's just rock solid. He typically shows up, but he was second best to Sadler's Joy in this Red Smith last year, and I don't think that he's discernibly better since then. I mean, I know he's coming off a victory, but he was in a similar situation last year where he was coming into the race in very good form. So I wasn't really looking to Red Knight at a short price as the one that was going to upset. And just kind of going through this field, I have no real problem with postulation. He'll probably be a price in this race. He actually ran deceptively well in the Red Smith last year because you might remember that Red Smith in 2019 featured a wicked pace on the front end, and he was really the only horse that was close to the pace that was anywhere near being around at the finish, and his effort in the Sycamore was fine. It did seem like they were just absolutely crawling up front, and what you said is right, Craig. That race was mostly dominated by closers. I had trouble deciphering whether it was dominated by closers because the closers were the best horses or because it was a race that actually fell apart and the race flow was different than what the pace would have suggested because the pace did seem to be slow. So I wasn't really sure what to make of that race. I mean, I guess some people might go to North Dakota coming out of that race because he did sort of get pushed into the rail on the stretch, and I suppose if he had gotten a clear run, he would have been a clear second that day. I don't know where that race came from. Maybe he's just a horse that always wanted to go longer. But personally, if I was going to pick a horse that was a big price to throw it underneath, it would be the number 11, Dr. Mounty, who's actually Shug's other horse in here. Dr. Mounty's never gone this far before, kind of in a similar situation to what North Dakota was when he was stretching out in the Sycamore last time. But Dr. Mounty is kind of a horse that I've always been interested to see go longer. He's got a ton of stamina on the dam side. He's actually a half-brother to Dabster, who was a horse for Bob Baffert that was running marathon distances on the dirt a number of years ago. I think he was competitive or even won. I think he ran in the money in the Breeders' Cup Marathon a couple of years ago. And Dr. Mounty is a horse that actually does have some ability. He's a little inconsistent at times, but I think if he improves going this longer distance, there's not that far of a gap to bridge for him to get into the money in this race at a big price. So I'll try to get him underneath, but not trying to beat my friend Sadler's Joy.
Yeah, one thing for sure, it's going to be a fun race to watch. I'll definitely have my eyes on Joel Rosario and Sadler's Joy because to me, that's the most interesting point of the race, to see what he can do to maybe turn the tables for this horse.
Let's move on down south to Churchill Downs, where on Saturday they're running the Grade 3 Chalukey Stakes. This one is for 3-and-up fillies and mares going a 1-turn mile on the dirt course. And I think we're going to have a clear-cut favorite in this race in the number 2 Finite. We'll remember that this filly was on the Kentucky Oaks Trail early in the year, obviously before the Kentucky Oaks was moved back to September. But she seemed like she was one of the best fillies in this division going back to that Fairgrounds meet. Things obviously went a little off the rails when she lost that Fairgrounds Oaks at a short price. She was off for a while, but it seemed like she finally got back on track in that Raven run last time, and stretching out to the mile is supposed to be no problem at all for her.
Yeah, you know me, I'm an anti-chalk guy, but I think she's going to be really tough in here. She would definitely be the most likely winner. The horse, I guess if we have to designate a top pick, it would be her. Like you said, she was leading the division, in my opinion, for a while there until something clearly went amiss. A layoff followed that loss in the Fairgrounds Oaks. She came back on the turf, a surface she had won on before, but with a much lower speed figure than she had been running on dirt. Over that weird Kentucky Downs course. Probably didn't even know what she was doing out there. But so I'm just putting a line through that race in the first off the layoff. And I really liked what I saw last time against Venetian Harbor. She didn't quite get up, but the pace was moderate. Venetian Harbor set a fairly easy lead that day. And she was still flying at the end. She gets that extra furlong today. So I just see her being super tough in here. I imagine she'll be a little bit closer up than she was that day. But just nothing too crazy for me. If I was going to look for a price horse, I would probably go to Gold Standard, the 5 horse. She's a horse who ran some pretty big races as a 3-year-old, had some big wins. She laid off for a while after that Oaklawn meet. She didn't run well at all in the Bayakoa, but she's come back for Brad Cox. Typically, her first time out, she didn't run all that well, but I like how she won second start off the layoff, ran kind of the same speed figure she did in the return, and I just think she's a horse that's likely to improve, and I like her as much as some of the other horses in here, like Grand Cru Class and Woe Nelly, Risky Mandate, who's a horse I think is probably going to be right up on the lead, forcing the pace. So if I had to pick a long shot, it would be Gold Standard.
I personally wasn't the biggest fan of Gold Standard, but I'm not going to try to talk anybody off a Brad Cox horse, especially not one at a price, because it seems like he just always shows up in these stakes races. I agree with you. Finite, she just seems like a super logical favorite. She ran really well in that Raven run, and she's got the prior form to back up that performance. It's not like it came out of nowhere. So I just think she makes a lot of sense. I was a little bit curious about the pace projector in this race, because I get that there are a number of horses that could be forwardly placed. I didn't see a ton of real front-running speed, though, and maybe you don't need that to create a fast pace going down that long 1-turn mile shoot at Churchill Downs, but I didn't necessarily see this as a race that was going to set up for Finite or a closer like her. Not that she needs a good setup to win, but I wasn't sure that I really was buying into the fast pace. And for that reason, I was leaning a little bit more towards Risky Mandate, the 4-year-old filly. I mean, if you throw out that La Troyenne 2-back where she was no match for Monomoy Girl, her form is just overall really good. I was very impressed by her victory at Keeneland last time with the blinkers on for the second time. I'm kind of throwing out the first time she wore the blinkers. She was just much more aggressive, and she easily set a fast, or I should say an honest pace that day, and just sort of kept going. Club Car, who was second, she came to her at about mid-stretch and looked like she had the momentum to go by, but Risky Mandate, once Louis Sayas set her down, she kicked on again and went away from that horse. Club Car did come back to win. You'll notice in the TimeformUS PP, she came back to win with a 97 TimeformUS speed figure, but that's a number that was significantly knocked down based on pace. She actually repeated her 109 final time figure when she won next time out. So I think that number looks totally legitimate that Risky Mandate earned, and that puts her right in line with Finite. And I just think she'll be a slightly better price, and she was going to get a favorable trip. If not on the lead, at least she was the most outside drawn speed horse, so she could stalk outside of some horses that could show speed to the inside. So Risky Mandate was the one that I was most interested in. And at a bigger price, I would also throw in the number 8 Unique Factor. The mile distance is a bit of a question mark for her because she's done her best work sprinting, but I thought she ran pretty well last time out in that stakes on the Breeders' Cup undercard at Keeneland. That was a spot where Amy's Challenge just got completely loose on the front end. There wasn't a whole lot of running going on from the back of the pack, and I thought Unique Factor did pretty well to get up for second there, and just she's been steadily improving for a long time for Peter Miller. Potentially this is a tough spot for her, but she'll be a price in this race, and I thought that she was one that could get in there.
Yeah, that's a good point about her. I like how you mentioned that she's steadily improving, because sometimes we forget with these 4-year-olds, they're still growing and maturing, and in a lot of cases haven't reached their best, and that's something I like to look at as well.
Let's finish up the show by moving north of the border to Canada. We'll do 3 races from their Saturday card, all stakes races consecutively, beginning with the 8th race at Woodbine on Saturday. That's the Grade 3 Ontario Derby, going 1 1/8 on the all-weather course for the 3-year-olds. And we've got an interesting situation here. Mighty Heart, who was going for that Canadian Triple Crown last time in the Breeders' Stakes, he failed. It wasn't really close. He was beaten a long way out in that Breeders. But, I mean, I don't really want to be too hard on him for not going 1.5 miles and over a course that he's never really handled before. He's clearly much more of a synthetic dirt horse than a turf horse. So he's getting back to the right surface here. And, I mean, I don't want to be too hard on the morning line maker at Woodbine. I thought there were some curious morning lines in these races we're going to discuss. I don't see how he's going to be a bigger price than Belichick, even though he was beaten by that horse last time, because, I mean, isn't Mighty Heart just kind of the horse to beat based on his prior 2 races on dirt and synth?
Yeah, it's an interesting race for me. I mean, I guess I can see Field Pass on the morning line. I don't know enough about racing at Woodbine to comment too much on the morning line and how shippers coming into the country like this get bet. Field Pass certainly has the credentials, but I think they'll all be close. I definitely agree Mighty Heart's going to take more money than Belichick. I mean, that 1.5 mile turf race was probably right up his alley, and cutting back to 1 1/8 miles. Of the horses I'm going to talk about, he's the one I'm tossing right away. I just don't. I think that was more that race was made for him, where this one isn't. And as far as Mighty Heart goes, I doubt he would even run in that race had he not been going for the Triple Crown. I think it was sporting of the connections to give it a try. But he was a horrendous morning or even money favorite on that day over a surface he had shown he didn't particularly care for at all when he tried it at the fairground. So I'm putting a line through that race and just ignoring it like it wasn't there. So I do think Mighty Heart is the horse to beat. But that said, I'm going to look in a different direction. I don't necessarily love Field Pass in here. He has run well on synthetic. He won that JR Stakes, or however you say that thing, at Turfway Park. He handled it fine, but mostly he's been running on the turf. But I'm going to stick with the locals, but I'm going to look to a different horse who wasn't involved in those Triple Crown races, and that's Lucky Curlin. There's a few things I like about him. Most importantly is he's probably going to be overlooked after talking about those other 3 in here. He's 6-1 on the morning line, and I'm hoping to get around that. No less than 5-1, but I don't think that's going to be an issue. And what I really like about him is that he hasn't had this chance to go 1.5 miles yet, and I think it's a distance that he's kind of crying out for. He's got figures that fit with the other horses in here, and I just think he's probably the fresher horse that's going to offer some value compared to the others.
Yeah, we mostly agree about the those 2 horses coming out of the Breeders' Stakes. Belichick, that was the day to have him when he was in against a very vulnerable favorite in Mighty Heart. But this is a completely different situation. I would look much more towards that Queen's Plate form where Mighty Heart easily beat Belichick by 7 lengths. Now, perhaps Belichick's just improving, but I mean, Mighty Heart would have to take a pretty significant step backwards for them to narrow the gap based on that Queen's Plate form. And the other thing about Mighty Heart in this race is, I mean, looking through here, I don't see that much speed. A lot of the horses we're talking about are closers, if not deep closers, and Mighty Heart has the speed to kind of set his own pace and maybe just keep going. I mean, you've got perhaps a little bit of speed coming from the number 8, Malibu Mambo, on the outside, but I mean, he set a pretty slow pace when he won last time. So, I mean, I just think Mighty Heart's really dangerous in here. Whether or not he's my top pick, I think will depend a little bit on how the prices shake out. Because for me, the other horse is very much Field Pass. I think I have a slightly more positive take on him than you do. He showed that he could handle synthetic in that Jeff Ruby Stakes win. I know all the synthetic horses are a little bit different, so I don't want to put too much stock in that. But I just think his recent form, if anything, is a little bit better than it looks. He made a move in that American Turf 2 back that was probably a little bit premature. Remember, that was a race where they went really fast on the front end, and it looked like he might have been sitting in the right spot about 5 lengths off that pace, but it turns out it was the horses that were about 5 lengths behind Field Pass that were the ones that were successful. Fancy Liquor and Tyshawn, who both came from a good 10 or 12 lengths behind, they were successful closing into that slow pace in the American Turf, so I thought Field Pass ran okay that day. And last time out in that Twilight Derby, he did not get the most clever ride from Drayden Van Dyke. He was breaking from the outside post position, but Drayden Van Dyke had some opportunities to get inside, and he just sort of elected to go 3 to 4 wide around both turns, never getting any cover for this horse, and that kind of resulted in Field Pass making a premature move again in that race on the far turn to engage at the top of the stretch, and he just couldn't quite finish it off and get to Smooth Like Straight, who is a very good turf horse in his own right. And I just think Field Pass has a slight class edge over this field. So if he's the 2-1 morning line favorite and Mighty Heart 7-2, I would lean more towards Mighty Heart. I kind of saw it being pretty close between these two, and if they're similar odds, I would gravitate a little bit more towards Field Pass. But I think they're the right two. I have no real problem with Lucky Curlin at a price. He's got to improve a little bit, but he does look like he's on that trajectory. And the other horse that I think is a little bit similar to Lucky Curlin is Menemba Island. He's won 4 of his last 5. Clearly, he's a horse that's kind of woken up since they've stretched him out further and further in distance. The 1 1/8 should be great for him after winning at 1 1/4 last time. He's another one that has to get faster, but at least he's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I don't really have any knocks at all on Field Pass. The only reason I went in a different direction was the price. I think, who knows if he'll really be 2-1, and he could certainly wind up playing him if he drifted up from that. The one comment I wanted to make on Belichick is that, yeah, he could very well be improving, but the speed figures didn't show that. He got a 104 in that Breeder Stakes, the third leg of the Triple Crown, which is essentially what he ran in the Queen's Plate when he was runner-up. So I don't think it was so much that he improved, just that he got a field he could beat over a surface he liked more than them. So he is definitely the big toss for me. But like you mentioned, I would be very surprised if he went off the second choice.
Moving on to the 9th race on that Saturday card at Woodbine. It's the Grade 2 Kennedy Road going 6 furlongs. And this one features that likable 8-year-old gelding Pink Lloyd, who has won 26 of 31 career starts. He's won this race before. I think he's coming into this race on a 10-race win streak, if you don't count that one race last year where he was a non-starter. He's just always shows up. He's so consistent. He's so easy to root for. I think the question with him is always, how short of a price do you want to take?
Yeah, he's always a tough one. I've tried to beat him a few times. A lot of times I pass. I've actually gotten lucky. I think I beat him twice, although one time was when he was declared a non-starter, which I'm still mad about. But I'm going to let that go. That's going to be my New Year's resolution for 2021. But yeah, he's clearly the horse to beat, but he's a horse who just hasn't run all that fast, so I'm probably going to try to beat him again. In this case, I think the two most obvious horses to try to beat him are Silent Poet. He would be the first one. He's coming off of several wins on the turf, mostly sprinting around this distance. He's definitely found his niche there. But he's a horse who, when he did try synthetic early in his career, he ran just fine on it. He ran figures similar to what he was winning on turf. And in this case, I think he may very well have a speed edge on the field. He looks like he's probably going to be a lone leader. It's hard to envision anybody challenging him early. The horse we have second on the pace projector, Roaring 40s, is a long shot who hasn't shown speed in a while. He was up close in a route race last time, but the time before that in a race with Pink Lloyd, he was well off the pace. So I just see Silent Poet being all alone and maybe being tough for Pink Lloyd to catch, particularly given that one has some gate problems at times and tends to put himself in a hole. And Silent Poet could very well be a horse a little tougher to run down than what he's been facing earlier in many of his recent earlier races. Ride a Comet is the other horse who is interesting. He's another one who's done most of his best running on turf. Particularly sprinting, but he's done well going long as well. He actually won the Grade 2 Delmore Derby couple years ago, but after that long layoff, he came back. He ran on the synthetic. He only got a 103 TimeformUS speed figure for that win, but he did overcome a really slow pace, came from well back, so I think he's sitting on a big race as well. So for me, I'm going to go with Silent Poet as my top pick, and from a wagering standpoint, I will even play a straight exacta of 4 and 2. Well, maybe a box, but with a little bit heavier on the 4-2 than the 2-4, just trying to beat Pink Lloyd.
Yeah, the funny thing about Pink Lloyd is, and I was looking into some of the races that he actually lost over the past few seasons, and when he does lose, it's not that he can't get to a leader, it's usually that he gets passed from behind. He's not a horse with this explosive turn of foot. He's a bit of a grinder, and I mean, he brings the rider into the race, but he's not always the strongest finisher, especially over the final 8th or 16th of a mile. So if there's a horse that's really wound up and is coming with a big late run, Pink Lloyd can be vulnerable to that at different times. He certainly has a nose for the wire. He usually gets it done. But I think you're right to point out that there were two legitimately classy rivals in this race in Silent Poet and Ride a Comet. And you're completely right about Silent Poet, that when he previously tried synthetic, he wasn't nearly as good of a turf horse back then. So I think there's an argument that his synthetic form is right in line with his turf form, and now he's just a much better horse overall. He does have that significant pace advantage. I'm a little surprised that the pace projector doesn't have this as a race that's projected to favor horses on or near the lead. I know there's one other horse that could be near Silent Poet early, but to me, he just looks totally loose in this race. And we'll see if that's the way that you beat Pink Lloyd. I mean, maybe the slow pace will allow Pink Lloyd to get right into the race, and if he's a length off Silent Poet at the quarter pole, perhaps it's going to be tough for Silent Poet to hold him off. It's going to be a fascinating tactical race, but ultimately I decided I wanted to go in the other direction and take Ride a Comet as the best alternative to Pink Lloyd. I know he got a slower speed figure last time, and I mean, you can't really argue it should be higher based on the field, even though Kingley, who was formerly in Bob Baffert's barn, he's a horse with plenty of back class on the turf. But just watching that race, Ride a Comet was so visually impressive. I mean, he just inhaled those horses from the back of the pack while barely being asked by Patrick Husbands. That was just so impressive. And I mean, he's 5 years old now, but I mean, he was coming off a very long layoff, and he had previously only raced as a 3-year-old and had shown real class back then, running against horses like Raging Bull, having won that Del Mar Derby before he was put on the shelf back in 2018. So there's an argument that he still has room to improve based on those 3-year-old numbers. And the 6 furlongs, sure, that's a question mark, but I mean, looking back at his races, he's shown the most explosive turn of foot when they've actually gone those 7 furlong distances with him around one turn. So I'm not so opposed to the turn back, and I just think if he can step forward off that race last time, he's a real threat.
Yeah, we agree on that. The figure doesn't mean much, but even the horses who have come back have run well. A lot of them have improved their figures, so I have no problem with that one. And you know me, I mean, Pink Floyd's going to be 2-5, and if I don't think he's a standout, which I don't in here, I'm going to try to beat him.
All right, let's finish things up. At Woodbine with the last of those 3 stakes races, the Grade 2 Bessarabian going 7 furlongs. It's the 10th race on their Saturday card, and this is one where, I mean, I don't want to be too hard on morning line makers because I get a lot of flack for that myself, but this is one that had me scratching my head a little bit. I mean, in my view, Amalfi Coast is just way the horse to beat in this race, and I'm not sure how she's going to be the third choice or a bigger price than Painting, who she beat by 5 lengths last time. I mean, maybe I'm missing something here, but I mean, I know Amalfi Coast was a big price when she won that race last time, the prep for this, but Amalfi Coast was a winner of this race last year when she was in great form. It seems like now she's back in that same form, if not doing better than ever, but I think that last out speed figure was the best that she's ever earned, and she was extremely impressive that day, coming up the inside to win by open lengths. I don't think she's going to be 7-2, but if she is, she'd be hard to resist at that price.
Yeah, well, I think we can go ahead and wrap up the show. You just covered all my notes here. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, we think very similarly on this race. One thing I'll mention about Woodbine, they have this long season. Obviously, it was a little shorter than most years in 2020, but I just love how we get races like this where we have horses like Painting, Super Escape, and Amalfi Coast who just face each other many times, and you get to analyze trips and look at their speed figures, and it's just a really cool thing about Woodbine, and one of the reasons I do like to play that track. We don't talk about it a lot on the show, but I'm a big fan of the product they're putting out. Now, handicapping this field, I started with the pace projector, and we see our forecast regular Jakarta. I didn't count how many times she's run this year, but it's got to be approaching 10, it feels like. She's just always in these races we talk about, and she looks to be a clear leader in here. She's never run on synthetic, but she has won on dirt or turf, and I'll be honest, if this race were 6 furlongs or less, I'd probably love her in here, but at 7 furlongs I don't. But what I do think she's going to do is ensure that the pace is really honest and set it up for those horses that I talked about, the ones who keep facing each other. And I'm with you. Of the three, I much prefer Amalfi Coast. I love that she ran that big speed figure last time. She's a 4-year-old, as I mentioned earlier, who seems to be improving and running her absolute best races right now. And I think she's clearly the horse to beat. And out of the other two, I mean, I prefer Super Escape. I would say I like Painting the least of all. Painting doesn't win all that often. She has the least tactical speed in a sprint race. So if I had to pick a second horse, it would be Super Escape. But I'm with you in liking Amalfi Coast the best.
Yeah, I mean, if Amalfi Coast is, 8-5, 9-5 in this race, my enthusiasm for her is going to wane a little bit. But she is the horse to beat, and I prefer her to those two other horses that you were highlighting that she's been competing against regularly, Super Escape, and especially Painting, who I just don't get at all, especially as a short price in this race. We've got the same take on Jakarta as the lone speed. I don't like going 7 furlongs, but she should at least ensure that they go an honest pace up front. She seems to always do that. So we're on the same page about her. The one horse that is pretty interesting to me as an alternative to these older fillies, and I would make her my top pick if Amalfi Coast gets bet down to 2-1. I wouldn't love betting her at that price, but that other horse is the number 2 Boardroom. And I don't know if she's going to be 10-1 because it seems like she usually takes a bit more money than that. But she's a 3-year-old filly who is quickly improving and who does have real ability, and she arguably should be undefeated because that race 2 back, I mean, it was basically a non-effort for her because if you watch coming out of the gate, the reins broke and Luis Contreras couldn't control her for the entire race and basically just eased her up for the stretch drive and didn't even try to win. So that's just a race that I would just draw a line through. And she came back last time against a similar field. And I know she only won by 3/4 of a length, but that was really impressive. I mean, she was wide around the turn, made a powerful early move to take over that race and opened up about 3 lengths in mid-stretch. And the margin was cut a little bit down at the end, but I thought she was just much superior to that field. And she is stepping up against older horses for the first time since she broke her maiden, but I think she's ready for that step up in class, and I'm not going to be shocked if she takes a big step forward on the speed figure scale against this tougher company. And I would hope for about 7 or 8-1 on her, but if we get that price, I'd make her my top pick.
Yeah, I have no problem with her whatsoever at those odds. I think her race was on Queen's Plate Day, and that was also a day that was really speed favoring. Not that she had any chance anyway with that broken rein, but after that break, she just had no chance whatsoever. So, yeah, no qualms with me on that one.
Well, that's all the racing we have to cover this week. We'll see, I think, what we're going to do next week. Craig and I, we haven't talked about it yet. Obviously, the Thanksgiving holiday is next Thursday, so we'll see if we might maybe just do a pace cast next week, or if we do a forecast on Friday. We'll have to coordinate our schedules and see how that works out. But we'll try to get you as much as possible when that rolls around. Craig, always great to handicap these races with you, and we'll do it again and do our recap show, and we connect again for the TimeformUS Pacecast on Tuesday. Remember that you can always listen to us on DRF.com, Spotify, iTunes, YouTube, and SoundCloud, wherever you get your podcast. Just make sure to subscribe to the Daily Racing Form channel, and make sure to tune in again next week when we do that TimeformUS Pacecast. Thanks for listening, everybody.